10. Crashing in the street. On a peaceful street in Germany back in 2011, a plane came crashing down from the sky. A pilot and his wife accidentally crashed their plane on the most unsuspecting suburban street in rural Stockstadt. The street wasn't even as wide as the airplane's wingspan, and although the couple did manage to escape unharmed, the plane clipped a house, took down a lamppost, and made a bit of a dent in the road. The pilot was actually just a hobbyist, someone who just flies small planes in their spare time for fun. He sent a mayday to the ground controllers just seconds before his crash. He told them, "We're going in. We have no choice." The issue was that the motor had begun to fail. As they were flying over the quaint town, the motor failed and there was nothing the pilot could do about it. He had been trying to make it from Reichelsheim to Aschaffenburg, and now he was falling out of the sky. He would have picked a green field to fall in, but he couldn't find one that wasn't filled with hedges or farm animals. The small stretch of street in this quaint suburban town was the only option he could see. For a hobbyist pilot, he made a pretty good landing of it. He tore down a hedge, crashed through a satellite dish, and hit the road in the center right on the nose. Not a single person was injured, and after the plane was taken away, it was like nothing even happened. 9. Giraffe collision. A giraffe became the unfortunate victim of a devastating collision on a runway in Africa back in 2013. A researcher who was in Africa investigating wild dogs was the one who accidentally ran over the poor, long-necked animal. He was in Botswana when it happened, coming in for a landing at the Santawani airstrip behind the steering instruments of his Cessna 172. Judging by the pictures of the damage, the position of the airplane, the broken wing, and the pretty obvious injury to the giraffe's neck, it's not tough to put all the pieces together. As the pilot was landing, the giraffe strolled onto the runway. It happened too quickly, and the pilot didn't have time to make the necessary maneuvers. He came down hard. His wing clipped the giraffe in the neck, half the wing was torn off the plane, and the giraffe landed dead on the concrete. As for the pilot, he sustained only minor injuries, but his plane was so damaged from both hitting the giraffe and the ground that there was no repairing it, bringing a sudden end to his African research voyage. 8. One plane, two plane. Near Dallas, Texas, in 2008, a small airplane made an extraordinarily bizarre emergency landing. It happened at the Northwest Regional Airport in Roanoke. This is a privately owned airport, one that doesn't have a control tower and where pilots don't have to play by the same rules as the rest. Pilots here don't have to transmit their location over the radio, but they're also not dealing with very large planes. These are small, very light aircraft. We're not sure exactly what happened here, but it appears that a small red airplane was waiting to take off from the runway when it got hit. An equally small white airplane landed on top of it, out of all the places it could have landed. It must have hit the thing pretty hard, because the white plane's wheels dug into the red plane's wings. Its nose crashed down on the cockpit of the red plane, and it was a miracle nobody got hurt. 7. Crash in Honduras. On May 18, 2019, 5 tourists died in a private plane shortly after it took off from the remote island of Rotan, located near the Atlantic coast of Honduras. 4 of the tourists were American citizens, while the other was a Canadian man. The crash happened almost immediately after the plane hit the sky. It was a single-engine plane, and it was absolutely torn to pieces when it hit the water. Not a single person inside the plane survived. and local rescue crews and rickety old boats had to show up to search through the wreckage and pull out the bodies. One of the victims of this brutal crash was a man from New Jersey identified as Bradley W. Post, 46. He was off on an adventure to learn how to fly fish. He left his wife and daughter at home, headed down to Honduras in Central America for a big adventure, and wound up getting on the wrong plane. He boarded the Piper Cherokee 6 airport at Rotan, bound for the small port of Trujillo. If you haven't heard of it before, it's a fairly popular destination for American tourists. Alas, the plane was doomed. The pilot was a Canadian by the name of Patrick Forsyth, an expatriate who was developing tourism projects throughout the area. We don't know what happened up there in the sky, if it was pilot error or mechanical malfunction. Whatever the case, the plane made a 90-degree turn straight at the ocean, putting a tragic end to Bradley's fly fishing adventure. 6. Cigarette in the cockpit. In May of 2016, an Egypt Air jet was flying from Paris to Cairo when it crashed and killed every last person on board. And while the Egyptian authorities initially claimed terrorism was responsible for the incident, a recent report determined that was a lie. The real reason this plane went down 6 years ago was because of cigarette smoking. This was Egypt Air Flight MS-804, which crashed into the Mediterranean Sea and killed 66 passengers. It happened just between the island of Crete and the northern coast of Egypt. The flight was operating with an Airbus A320, a pretty large airplane. The initial investigation revealed that a fire had started near the cockpit of the plane and that there were trace elements of explosives discovered. The country's aviation minister blamed a terrorist attack, although at the time, French investigators would not draw that same conclusion. And after a while, the media just kind of stopped reporting on it, and that seemed to be the end. Until 2022. Those same French investigators have now figured out exactly what happened to cause the plane to go down. It was all because the pilot decided he couldn't wait until the plane landed to have a cigarette, so he lit one up in the cockpit. The issue was that the co-pilot's mask was leaking pure oxygen. 3 days before the crash happened, the mask had been replaced and its setting was left on emergency instead of normal by the maintenance engineer. This meant that the whole time they were flying, that one emergency mask was constantly spewing out oxygen. When the pilot lit his cigarette, the flame caused the oxygen to combust. It would have been like a grenade going off in the cockpit, resulting in the plane going down immediately. 5. Rough landing in Pacific Lagoon. An Air Niugini Boeing 737-800, an extremely big plane if you're not sure, ended up sinking into a lagoon outside the airport of Chuuk Island back in September of 2018. The problem occurred when the airplane was trying to make a landing at the airport in the Federated States of Micronesia. The plane missed the runway early on a Friday morning and skated directly into the ocean. It was a dramatic and frightening experience for those on board, who hadn't been expecting to get wet on their flight. Luckily, they were all rescued by local fishermen who saw the disaster and brought their boats over to assist. Only 7 people were injured, even though the plane crashed right into the water, and only 1 had to be taken to the hospital in critical condition. Air Niugini is the national airline of the Pacific nation Papua New Guinea and has been since 1973. This flight had actually been on its way to Pompeii and had only planned to stop in Chuuk briefly. But it appears that the visibility was extremely poor because of the weather. The pilot clearly overshot the runway, his view obscured by the cloud and fog. and crashed all 50 or so of his passengers into the water. 4. Disaster in LA. In summer 2022, at about 9:40 a.m. in Los Angeles, Eugene Barron watched in disbelief as an airplane crashed straight into his neighbor's backyard. He heard a noise like a squeaky tire, a great squealing, and then a big boom. Eugene's entire house shook. The windows shattered. Rocks like shrapnel came flying through the air, and there was a great big pit in his neighbor's yard where the plane had just exploded. Both Eugene and his neighbor ran outside at the same time and used their garden hoses to douse the engine, which was aflame. They then helped the pilot out of the cockpit and brought him somewhere safe. Unfortunately, this was harder than it should have been because the pilot was on fire. He was completely covered in flames, and Eugene and his neighbor didn't know what to do except call 911. Luckily for them, a Riverside County fire truck was passing by just a few streets over and came to the rescue. The pilot had been the only one inside the Beechcraft Model 77. We don't know what went wrong, only that the flight came from the nearby Whiteman Airport. This place is absolutely despised by people in the neighborhood because it's often used for training new pilots. They fly too low and they're always buzzing over people's houses. And this time, someone actually crashed a plane into someone's backyard. It's lucky they didn't hit the house, which had 2 people inside at the time. 3. Dramatic rescue. In November of 2021, a couple of agents with U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered something they had not been anticipating. They were conducting joint operations near Cedar Key when they came upon not some illegal immigrants trying to paddle their way into the country, but a man standing on the top of a rapidly sinking aircraft. It was a good thing that the joint operations were taking place that day, since it was them who noticed the downed plane in the middle of the water. In fact, without them, the man they found standing on top of it probably would have drowned. When the agents approached the sinking aircraft, the guy had just crawled out of the windows to stand on top of the fuselage. He was the only one on board, and so the agents helped him onto their boat while his plane continued to sink. Unfortunately, the CBP refused to release any information regarding the man or what caused him to crash his plane into the ocean. All we know about this guy is that he was wearing jeans and a blue shirt, that he had clearly made some kind of mistake while flying his light aircraft off the coast of Florida. Thankfully, he wasn't injured. He was only about 2 minutes from certain death, or at least from having to try and swim all the way back to the shore through miles of raw ocean. 2. DHL Plane Disaster. A DHL cargo jet broke clean in half in 2022 when it had to make an emergency landing at an airport in Costa Rica. This wasn't a small delivery airplane either, but a giant cargo jet that carries precious goods across the world for DHL, a Boeing 757-200 cargo aircraft. And even though only one airplane was involved in the accident, the crash impacted 57 flights going to and from the U.S., Central America, Canada, and even Europe. The DHL aircraft had been on its way to Guatemala when it suffered a catastrophic failure to its hydraulic system. This is a major thing to go wrong with an airplane because hydraulics are responsible for a lot of the mechanical features in the plane. For example, the wings that make the airplane fly. Because the hydraulic system was broken, the pilot immediately requested an emergency landing back at the airport. Luckily, the pilot had just taken off and noticed instantly that his hydraulics had completely failed. According to the director of the Costa Rica Fire Department, Hector Chavez, it broke apart when it made its emergency landing. It hit the ground, skidded, turned too fast, 180 degrees, and ripped in two like a dry twig. Both the pilot and the co-pilot were evacuated and in good health, and airport crews mobilized to prevent a jet fuel spill that could have caused a massive fire. Then the plane had to be removed from the runway before any other flights could come in or take off. 1. Mystery crash in China. At 2:20 p.m. on March 21, 2022, China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735 plummeted out of the sky. She was flying at 29,100 feet, piloted by one of China's most experienced aviators and two other skilled pilots. The plane, which was a Boeing 737-800NG, had only been in service for 7 years. At the time of the dip, nobody knew what was happening. There had been no warning, the pilots never sent any Mayday messages, and the air traffic controllers couldn't make any contact. Within 60 seconds, the plane had fallen 20,000 feet. It then gained 1,200 feet of altitude for a few fleeting seconds before making the final plunge into a forest of banana trees and bamboo groves. The plane hit the ground vertically, right on the nose with such speed and power that the entire aircraft was ripped into pieces as it was driven 60 feet deep into the mud. 2 pieces of the wing were discovered 7 miles away. There were no survivors. The mystery is that nobody knows what happened. We don't know why the plane crashed. And based on the preliminary investigations coming out of China, we may never know. They found their investigation to be inconclusive, meaning not even the professional airplane crash investigators have a theory on why Flight 5735 fell from the sky. Would you rather be in a plane or a blimp in case of an accident? Let us know which would be scarier in the comments below, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit subscribe and come back soon for more awesome videos.